there have been times that I almost ended up bankrupt. There have been times that I thought I was going to fail, to the point when at one point in Genesis, I had my rent was due, my electric was due. I was 2 months behind on my car insurance. I had no food. I had $10 to my name and a business partner who was
You are
yelling
listening
at
to
me.
Josh Halter of the BioDude. Now, if you are someone who is well into the world of bioactivity, you almost certainly are aware of the company, the BioDude. This is a company that's only been around for a few years, but it seems to be growing at a pretty impressive rate. Now, at the end of the conversation, we do get into all of those bioactive questions. So we kind of start at the beginner level, how to set it up, microfauna, drainage layer, what substrates to use, and whatnot. And then we get into a little more advanced topics such as bioactivity for snakes and Arid setups. And I shouldn't say they're advanced, they're just things that aren't as popular in the hobby. So if this is going to be a great conversation for everybody, whether or not you're just getting into bioactivity or you've been doing bioactivity for a long time and you need some pointers. And even for me, I've been doing bioactivity for a long time, but there's a lot that I learned in this conversation. I can't wait to apply it in my new day gecko viv that I'm working on right now. And the middle and the beginning of this podcast really discuss and we really get in and see kind of how much passion Josh has for this company and how much passion he has for the work that he does and how much he's sacrificed. Even in that very beginning of the clip, you start to see he had to really grind to get to where he is today. And that's what I found most fascinating about this. It would be impossible not to want to support this company after listening to this podcast. So I hope you enjoy it. Before we get into that, as usual, if you'd like to support the show, please share it with your friends. Share it to everybody. Share it on Instagram and Facebook. That helps me out a ton. If you'd like, please add a review on the Apple podcasting app. It's very simple. You can just hit 5 stars if you're enjoying the show that much. That would be fantastic. And if you'd like to pick up an Animals at Home t-shirt, you can find those at animalsathome.ca/shop. As a reminder, at the end of September 28th and 29th in Rodeo, New Mexico, there is the Advancing Herpetological Husbandry Conference. This conference looks incredible. I highly recommend going to check it out if you have the time, if you're in the area, or if you have a couple of days of vacation. It looks like it's going to be incredible. I will leave all the links to that in the show notes as well as in the description. Here is my conversation with Josh. Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I have to tell you, usually before an interview, I prep and really cover what I want to cover in an interview. And for this one, for the last 20 minutes, I've just been reviewing my favorite lines from The Big Lebowski.
Yeah, there's so many.
There's an infinite. I was literally laughing to myself in my kitchen like 10 minutes ago at some of those lines. So I'm guessing you must be a massive fan of that movie. Or
I am, and it got me through a lot of, it sounds stupid, but it got me through a lot of hard portions in my life. Just, I'd be down and I'd watch it and I'd instantly be in a better mood because that guy, he doesn't care.
Yeah.
He doesn't care about anything. He just does him. And, that's me. I just do me, and, people accept or they don't. And and the dude is the same way. So it works out.
How long have you had the nickname The Dude?
Oh man. So it goes back a while to, I would say I was a veterinary technician before I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And at the veterinary hospital I worked at, called East York Veterinary Center in York, Pennsylvania, people would just call me Dude instead of Josh because I give off this laid back, even though I'm my attention span's like a fruit fly and I'm a very energy efficient dude, but I'm still really, let's and people just, people dig it, and that's just how it coined. And, when I came up with the BioDude, it was after everything with Genesis, closed down, and I was at a loss. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought I was done, and I was so distraught. I had all my friends over, and we had some brewskis, and we watched The Big Lebowski, and they're like, "You can't give up, Josh. Dude, you can't give up." And I said, "BioDude," and they go, "BioDude, BioDude," and it happened like that.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So that's very cool. And I'm a very big picture guy, so I would love to kind of build up that story from the beginning, briefly.
Sure.
We don't have to go back to your birth or anything. But what? Tell me about the first reptile that you got.
The first reptile I personally got to have as a pet
Yeah,
was a leopard gecko named Bob that I purchased from that fish play that my mom purchased from that fish place, that pet place in Lancaster, Pennsylvania for me. Um, I got Bob when it was right after my parents got divorced. So they got divorced when I was 13. So about 13 and a half to 14 is when I was allowed to get my first one. But I was always sneaking, ones I'd find outside in, like, because I lived in Pennsylvania. So I'd find salamanders and newts, when you could actually find caudates in the wild, you know.
yeah. It and especially up, you're more. Obviously, you're in Texas now, but in Pennsylvania, it's you got to really dig to find some good reptiles sometimes.
Yeah, I will have to say, like, I really miss Pennsylvania. Like, I love finding all the different chelonians. There's a lot of different turtles, especially the eastern wood turtles and the eastern boxies. I'd go to the same spot year after year after year and find the same specimens, and it was cool because you could see how they, like, the changes from past season to the next season to the next season. And even though, like, I didn't get to have them, to me, I felt like I had this weird bond with them, even though they were wild animals, because I'd find them year after year after year. And I did that. I did that for years, man. My wife, the first date we went on, I took her to a swamp to catch snapping turtles.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm sure she was into it, hopefully, or she just
Yeah. I have a picture of her holding a small snapper and doing ironically a thumbs up, and you could just see the look of terror on
yeah,
her face, because you know how snappers are. They put their heads halfway back and they're just chomping at you. You
yeah.
know, you didn't
That
know what to do. But
that's
I
awesome.
digress. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. So you had Bob, and I know when I was reading your bio on your website, it says that you started Bioactive relatively early in your
I
reptile
did.
pet career. So that was that like maybe 15 years ago or something like that. I mean,
About that.
yeah,
So I I first started using, like, the Eco Worth a long, long, long time ago. This was back in 2003. But before that, I would go outside and I would literally just dig it up myself, and I would always find springtails. They always just show up, and I was like, the first time I saw it, I was like, what is this? And then, I started doing a little bit research, and then my friend Jonathan Klein, Jonathan, if you're listening, I miss you. He's the one that, like, kind of educated me about that, and I was a lot younger at that point. Um, and then after that, I just really started tweaking my own mixes, especially with the leopard gecko. Like, my leopard gecko, I started off with coconut coir, sand, and, like, some other rocky ingredients that I'd find outside, because Pennsylvania is really lime rich in the soil. So, it took a lot of figuring out preventing, like, methane buildup. I've actually had difficult experiences with viper geckos. And I kept them on my very, very first mix, and the humidity at the very bottom just wasn't aerating appropriately. And I would move it and dig it, and then methane would kick up. And I was like, oh my God, I can't keep my animals on this. So there was a lot of trial and error on my part. And working at one of my jobs at that fish place, that pet place in the reptile room for over 3 years, they would bring in, like, the Eco Worth, like I mentioned earlier, and that's all they'd let me use. And I'd get really frustrated because they kept losing their Pac-Man frogs, and they didn't understand why. And I was like, well, you have to change it out every week, every 2 to 3 weeks, because they're sedentary. They sit in their urine, their osmotic pressures get thrown off, and then they get skin infections and die. And quick. And that example is everywhere. And I'm not just saying that about the product, just that that low advancement and the base level of husbandry has never changed. A majority of these big name vendors, it's all the same stuff, just marketed differently, all from the same suppliers, just marketed differently and packaged differently. And while there have been great innovations, dude, I love Pangea. I love what he's done. I love what Josh's Frogs has done for for the amphibian community. What Marty's done with Miss King, with like all and Arcadia, all that's been amazing. But when I look at the United States, when I look at just the base level husbandry for substrate, humidity retention, and drainage, it was non-existent, and that's not fair. It wasn't fair to them, and that really drove me around when I was about 16 years old to try to start figuring it out.
That's really interesting because, I mean, even 15 years ago or 13 years ago, whatever it was, there was not a lot, like the hobby was still so new that it's almost like a risk, like going outside and digging up to your own dirt. But you clearly saw a problem that you just thought you would try to fix.
Absolutely. And, and the biggest thing that got like, I love all reptiles, dude, but I've always been a frog guy. My specialty's always been tree frogs. But where I've worked at pet stores, and I've seen just how many of them are lost just in the general day-to-day operations of the hobby as a whole. And it makes you feel sick to your stomach, because at the end of the day, it's about profits, and it's about, what can I scale that's the cheapest to get the most out at once. And that's what was wrong with this hobby. That is what has been consistently changing, in my opinion, over these last 15 years, with these awesome entrepreneurs going out and accomplishing what they want and changing what they feel is wrong. And, I used a lot of, I look at a lot of other people with what they're doing too. And I really try to base myself all off of them in a subtle way that I'm still my own, but that I can still make the same type of changes and advancements that they did. And, cause again, it's all about the animals, man. It's all about making sure they can take care of.
Yeah, exactly. And it is just about progressing. We can't go from 0 to 100 right away, but moving the needle over every chance we get is super important. So even at that young age, you saw that there was a hole in the hobby. In terms of your head as a career, you said you went into sort of a vet tech role to begin with. So were you just always wanting to go into an animal career without exactly knowing?
Yeah. So not to get too deep into it, my parents went through a really bad divorce when I was 13. Which I essentially raised myself, but I was pretty much left alone because they were too busy doing what they were taking care of. So, I didn't have a lot of guidance. I got a certification in landscaping, but I'm skinny. People would look at me and they'd be like, yo, this guy can't do it. Even though I got like most creative at the Pennsylvania Farm Show for exhibit design, but I digress. I knew I wanted to be with animals, but I didn't have the money to go to college. So that's why I got established as, working in the vet field. And I was in the vet field for 9 years. I started as a kennel and then worked my way up to a technician status. And I loved it. That's how I met my wife. She's a veterinarian now, but I knew I always wanted to work with animals, and dogs and cats gave me a really good view of what I wanted and what I didn't want. I love having dogs and cats as pets. I don't particularly like working on them as much, just because the sad end of it with the euthanasias and people not wanting to spend the money to take care of them is a little draining, to put it lightly. So that's when I started Genesis Exotics with my brother, when I wanted a career change, and it just didn't work out. I moved down to Texas to take it serious with him, and it just wasn't a right fit. So that's when, that got dissolved, and BioDude came into play in January of 2017. But I knew I always wanted to do something with animals. I knew I always loved reptiles. I always loved being around them, and I loved learning about them and stuff like that. It was just really hard to find a job that could pay the bills, and have the same type of opportunities that another type of career can offer you, as far as, mental health, as far as financial health, as far as everything, how that goes.
Well, that's a really interesting story. It's amazing how much you've probably had to grind to get to where you are now. And so in terms of Genesis, like, what was the business model difference between Genesis and BioDude?
So Genesis Exotics really specialized in, so I've made my own fruit fly media, some other insect gut loaders, my bug grub, and I bred dart frogs and tree frogs. And that's originally what it was. It was a 50-50 split between my brother and I. And my brother designed the website, and helped me and helped, get the big picture stuff done while I handled the day to day. And the business model really wasn't with Bio, because that really isn't what he wanted to do. We really wanted to be just the frog aspect, because I really looked up to Josh Willard at Josh's Frogs. I loved what they were doing for the education aspect of the hobby. And I saw that Texas had a huge open market for it because it didn't exist down here. And to be successful in this business, you have to create new customers via education, and by making sure that what you're offering is at an either a next level, to create that solid expectation that they're providing best. Because to me, if I compare Genesis and the BioDude, my number one accomplishment between the two, if I take out the financials and the other success, is just the level of reach on the education stance that I've been able to get done to get people to keep reptiles and amphibians the right way. Genesis didn't really offer me that. Genesis offered me the ability to breed frogs, to sell frogs, and to be quite honest with you, doing it in Texas was very hard for an online business, because I hate shipping animals. I hate it. It is, I didn't lose a lot in shipping, but the frogs come in stressed, and then it makes it harder for the people to take care of them sometimes. And I really hated spending months and months on raising froglets, and I sell them, and then 2 weeks later they die, because somebody who didn't want to listen to me or listen to what I had to say do it. And it was really disheartening for me, Dylan, and to be able to, step back and look at, hey, what's really going to make me happy? What is it that I really want to accomplish here in my life with what I love to do? And honestly, that's really what led me to the decision of, closing down Genesis and moving forward with my life to, to obviously choose the right path, as my wife would put it.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and even breeding animals, you'll run into that, what you just described, that sort of ethical dilemma where you're like, I love these animals, but now I'm creating them to a life that's just going to stress them out and end in a sort of premature death type situation. So, and for anyone that's not ran a business before, it is insanely stressful. The amount of, especially going through a business closure like that, where you have to pull the plug, like the amount of just visceral, it's hard to describe, isn't it?
It is. So I am 31, and I found 3 gray hairs on my head last month. They weren't there before.
Yeah.
Now, in all seriousness though, it's the gut feeling of, you have to not be afraid to fail. And if you fail, you have to fall forward, not fall backward. You have to be willing to make sacrifices and risks, and just go for it and believe in yourself. That's the biggest thing, is you have to believe in yourself that you can do it. And I mean, I look at everything that I've gotten done, and I'm really happy with where I'm at. But dude, I haven't scraped the surface with what I want to do. I have so much stuff in the works, and I'm so excited. It's just, you just got to take it a day at a time. And, the transitioning the business from Genesis, shutting that down, getting BioDude started, that wasn't that bad, honestly. Like, I started BioDude out of a storage unit with one plug and my house. And I remember I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd go to the storage unit that was about 95 to 110 degrees, and I would make dirt until about 11 o'clock. And then I'd get to my house, and I'd get all the orders done. Get them to FedEx. Then I'd have to do customer service. Then I'd have to take care of the animals. And that would take me probably about 60 hours a week until I was able to afford my first warehouse here at my current location. But there have been times that I almost ended up bankrupt. There have been times that I thought I was going to fail, to the point when, at one point in Genesis, I had, my rent was due, my electric was due. I was 2 months behind on my car insurance. I had no food. I had $10 to my name, and a business partner who was yelling at me, telling me I didn't know what I was doing and I wasn't making the business enough money. And I almost became homeless. And if it wasn't for my parents bailing me out, At that point, they were begging me to come home to Texas. They were or come home to Pennsylvania. Just stop. You tried, didn't work out, but I persevered, and I will remember that forever.
Yeah, I mean that's the sort of stuff that just makes you a harder and a tougher individual. And the analogy that I've been in business before, and the analogy that I've come up with before is doing when you fail in business, it's like writing an exam and then failing and having no clue what you got wrong. Like never looking at the answer sheet, never having the thing graded back to you and saying these are where you got wrong. Like you just have no clue. You don't know how much you failed by. You don't know if it was like 1% or 100%. Like it's a very bizarre experience.
Yep, and that's what makes it so terrifying. Is it, and it's just the level of risk that can come with it. But I mean, I love it. I mean, I have 11 full-time employees here. I'll be offering health insurance by the end of the year. I offer simple IRAs with BioDude matching up to 3%, sick days, holiday pay. Like when I started my business, not trying to digress really far, but when I was a veterinary technician or when I, worked in warehouses, I always felt like an ant. I always felt disposable. My opinion was, while I was a good employee, where a lot of times they listened to me sometimes, but other times I felt consistently unheard or underappreciated. And I promised myself that I would not have my business be like that, that I would not be like everybody else. And as of right now, I mean, I've had very little turnover, and you know, I'd always tell people that are coming in for interviews, if you really want to know what it's like to work here, go talk to each and every person here, and they'll give you an honest answer. And I'm comfortable enough to do that. But sorry, I keep digressing.
No. That's excellent. I like that. So when you started it, it was mostly just the soil base. Like, is that you were creating soils to sell? Was that the first and sort of one SKU you had?
That was it. I had a total of four SKUs, five SKUs that were my drainage layer, my four substrates. I then created my base bioactive kits, my bioactive kits, the species specific kits with plants that I was able to get. And then, of course, like my diets, like my media that I have probably sold close to 15 tons of in my career. My bug grub, which I probably sold close to 12 tons of so far in my career, in my springtail grub. I think my initial launch had 15 to 16 products on it, plus all my kits. That's it. And go ahead.
Yes. So tell me about that process of creating soil. Like how did you go about creating specific soil types?
Cool. So first, what I did was I started first researching different areas, and I started literally looking at pictures of the different areas and then the common types of plants in there. And then I started looking at the plant care. Do they like acidic? Do they like well drained? Do they need this? Do they need this? And then I was able to cross-reference what I'm seeing with the plant care and then doing research on different ingredients to try and mimic that as closely as possible. My Terra Sahara took me, I want to say like 6 to 8 years. I don't even know, to get it right. Because what's so hard about desert is that the substrate's heavy. It has to be heavy if you want to get it right. And when you get it heavy, that means it's going to want to compact. You need to make sure that when it compacts, it still aerates top to bottom, because if it's not aerating, the aerobic bacteria is going to outcompete the anaerobic bacteria. The good bacteria is going to outcompete the bad bacteria is going to outcompete the good bacteria. Sorry, it's been a long morning, which is going to build up other things, bad stuff like methane and other things like that will cause your stuff to fail. So it was a lot of trial and error, and a lot of just in-depth testing to make sure that what I'm doing is actually going to last. I get a lot of criticism over my terra firma because I don't require a drainage layer for it. But I look at my showroom and my corn snakes over there. That terrarium has been set up for 9.5 years, dude, with the same dirt that I just kept using over and over again. We got Nagini. I bought this corn snake for my wife. It was $5, and it was the size of an earthworm. I'm like, this thing's never going to survive. We had to feed it pinky hits.
Wow.
To get it started, and it survived. So I just kept using the dirt, which was my firma, over and over again as we increase the tank size. And now they're in a 75 gallon with a lot of really older substrate in it. But after I was able to keep my bearded dragon Yoshi, which I had for 9 years, on my pre-Sahara mix is what I like to call it, because one of my ingredients was very hard to find in Pennsylvania. Very hard to find. So I was very limited with what I could do with it. But after I was able to keep Yoshi on it, and then I saw how the air pockets were with being able to retain the tunnels and burrows, I knew I had it. Because it wasn't only about functionality, it's about nurturing their natural instincts of animals. Because you can sit there and you can pick apart your husbandry as much as you want, but besides lighting and heating, the most important thing is your base, which is your substrate. That is the most important thing for A, their well-being, B, for shedding, respiration, and hydration, and honestly, C, for allowing them, I guess, instinctual nourishment. I can't. My ocellated skinks that are in my Sahara, they're live bearers. They've been breeding now for 3 years. That I got from Sean Harrington, the Frog Whisperer, which I highly recommend you look into him. He's a great guy. They literally have a network of tunnels throughout the entire system. And every morning, the head female, she looks like a hot dog. She sticks her head up like a prairie dog. She does literally a 360 around. And then they come out one by one by one by one. That is nourishing of the wild side of them. As Arcadia so puts it eloquently, wild recreation. And it's great. And a lot of people lose sight. Like they see like bearded dragons bred on a commercial scale. They see leopard geckos bred on a commercial scale, but they're not domesticated. They are still wild animals. And somewhere along the lines, these products on the general scale forgot about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because there's all these behaviors that are programmed into these animals that you will not see in a shoebox tub. And like, for example, you're telling this story about this female kind of coming out and checking to make sure everything's safe. You would have no clue that she would do that unless you put her in an environment that promoted that behavior.
You're exactly right. And because of space issues, I've had to prevent some of my animals from breeding. Every single animal here is trying to breed. Every single one. Just to put it, how I know it's the best, my carpet chameleons have laid eggs in their enclosure. My Borneo-eared frogs have laid eggs in their enclosure. My red eyes are breeding in their enclosure. My Cuban nightingales are breeding in their enclosure. My emeralds are breeding in their enclosure. Cinnamons are breeding in their enclosure. I can keep going on and on. But I'm not doing anything. They are that comfortable enough without any external stimuli. When you look at tree frogs in general, I want to breed tree frogs. Everybody will tell you the same thing, that you need a rain chamber. Some species you do. Some species a rain chamber is necessary, like mainly phylomedusas, dumpies, just because of the amount of water that they need. But with how I have them set up, majority of my tree frogs are just breeding without any extra stimuli in the cage. And when you have to sit and pick up the frogs, put them in another container, that really stresses them out. Or honestly, for any animal to create a breeding box that isn't inside the cage, it makes it, I don't know, that's not how it goes down in the wild.
Right. Oh yeah. No, that's 100% right. And so I guess the soils and the substrate is really the niche that you grabbed a hold of. And at this point, are you guys still mixing the soil and packaging it yourself? So that's all in-house.
Everything I do is all from my diets to my substrates to everything. So my LEDs and my new solar grows that are going to be released tomorrow. They're not, I don't manufacture those here. I get them manufactured overseas. But everything else, we mix by hand. We visually inspect by hand. And in about 2 months, my bug grub, my media, my springtail grub, my flower power, which I'm really excited to announce here coming out soon, is all going to have a guaranteed analysis, as well as a nutrition label that states the calcium phosphorus ratios, the beta carotene ratio, the retinol ratio, the vitamin A ratio to show people that that what I'm saying with the vitamin A, giving the carotenoids that they need to synthesize the vitamin A, is actually in these ingredients, as well as having individual lot numbers and batch numbers. So that way you're getting that small batch quality. And that is what we want here at the BioDude. We really want to make sure that we're always doing the best. I will never manufacture my mixes anywhere else but in-house. I will never get it done overseas. I will never order containers of it packaged from Thailand or Vietnam and have it come over here on a boat like some of the other big guys do. I will never do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's, I think, really reassuring to a lot of people, for one, and people love to see things stay, stateside in terms of business, just economically. But
oh, absolutely.
But the quality, you're absolutely right. The quality just degrades very quickly when you ship. I mean, obviously you're importing, I'm sure you import like wood and cork from overseas, like that sort of thing. But anything that's has to be mixed is done by hand by you guys.
Yeah, it's actually funny. So I got this like giant, it has a handle. So imagine a jackhammer, except instead of the base of a jackhammer, it's a giant metal spoon thing that spins. So we put the diets in these special bins, and you hold it down and it mixes everything. And we have to wear these special gowns and stuff. It's unreal. But yeah, man, one thing I will never do, and one thing I tell my employees every day, or not every day, but every meeting, is that we will not be like everybody else. Everybody seems to have issues with scaling their business to keep the quality of the product where it was since inception, while keeping the quality up, while growing your business and making sure that nothing changes. And it happens to a lot of businesses. They get big and then they have to change some things, which can sometimes limit the quality of the products that they're doing. And if I have to take that route, I won't sell it.
Yeah,
I'll put it that way.
Well, I think that's a great idea. And so, do you have a plan to scale it to keep everything here, or is that? I mean, if it's a secret under wraps thing, you don't.
No. So I actually just found out yesterday I got approved for a business loan, an SBA business loan for around $600,000. I was trying to buy a property, which we put under contract, but it didn't work out, which I just found out yesterday, which is pretty disheartening. So now I have 90 days to find a new warehouse. I'm trying to find a warehouse that's between 10,000 and 16,000 square feet. But my plan is to be out of my current space and into my new building by the beginning of January. And once I have that new space, the sky is the limit, is pretty much what I'm going to say with that.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I was going to ask what makes BioDude so successful, but I think you're making it very obvious. I think the passion that you have and the vision that you have it's very clear. Was entrepreneurship something from a kid that you were interested in, or is this just something that you found along the way?
Yeah, dude. So we lived around a lot of fir forests. So Christmas time, and my dad had a beach house before so my mom and I would collect oyster shells, and I would paint Santa Claus faces on them and drill a hole in them and turn them into ornaments. I'd sell those. I would take the tree fur and I would make wreaths and decorative stuff out of that. I'd sell it. I would set up lemonade stands when I was a kid. I'm not kidding, dude. At one point, I turned my room into a store and pretended customers were coming in. That's when I was like 8 or 9. It's always been in here, man. But I never knew what journey was meant for me until, honestly, it clicked to me when I met my wife, because I was having issues to put it plainly, there's not a lot of HR in private practice veterinary hospitals. And after I disclosed my relationship with my wife, some other higher end up people got a little jealous, and then my career there started going down the drain quickly thereafter. So I was really upset, because I was like, this is really unfair. And she's like, you should do something with your reptiles, baby. You are so good at it. And she just kept saying it until my brother and I started talking, and it just happened. And then here I am.
Well, there's nothing better than marrying that deep entrepreneurship drive with a passion, because like it's hard to be an entrepreneur and run a business that you're not passionate about. And So that's sort of the key to success. So in terms of, I know now you guys have a wide variety of products, obviously your soil and your grubs, and do you ship live plants as well, or how does that work?
So live plant, yes, we ship live plants everywhere, but like Alaska, Hawaii, in the 48 continental. Um, Live plants can be tricky because the USDA likes to get down on you, especially in Texas. If you're shipping to Florida or California, you need to have phytosanitary certificates to
Right.
prove that A, they don't have fire ants, and B, that they don't have nematodes or other stuff like that. We always ship our plants with all of our kits bare root. I would say we're pretty good at it. I mean, you can always get better. I actually just hired a full-time plant person. That's their job. He actually starts in 2 weeks, which is really going to help me out because, you know, I know a good amount about plants, but AJ is, he's like me, how I am with reptiles, but plants. And I'm so excited to get him in here because he's going to teach me some stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you guys
and to
grow
help,
everything in house? You guys, or do you order
so
stuff in?
so some stuff we grow, not a lot of it. The majority of the products that I get, I actually found specialized growers from southeast that grow them in the way that I needed them to grow. But growing them that way poses challenges for me. So they have to use really hydroscopic soil, which means it's super absorptive because they're not using other things in it to help it grow faster. So a lot of times when plants get in, if they have issues, I'll sprinkle some of my BioShot on top, depending if they need help. But to put it plainly, dude, I go through an 18-wheeler of plants every 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, dude.
Wow.
It's
That's
crazy.
crazy.
And it sucks because that 18-wheeler, they can't fit in my warehouse. So I have to take my Nissan and the big Cosby van. Two of my employees have to go meet them at the parking lot, load up between 100 and 180 plant boxes in the back. Then we have to unload it. Then we have to unpack everything.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, every 2 weeks, dude. It's great.
That's
It's my
incredible.
favorite. Everybody
Yeah.
loves Plant Day here. You say, what's today? Plant Day, and they all get really excited.
Well, it's really amazing. I mean, so the BioDude, really, for anyone that is not familiar with, I'm sure most people are, is it's really a one-stop shop. If you're wanting to start from scratch with going bioactive, you can essentially get everything but the animal from you guys.
Yep. And I really appreciate that. And, I encourage a lot of people that I have so many people reach out to me like, BioDude, I'm in Australia. Can you please provide me a basic mix that'll get me through? Or, we love all bio here. There is, well, one of my first real challenges as an entrepreneur, and I'm not going to lie, is when my business really started taking off, I got a lot of hate directed at me just from people that had no business and doing what they were doing, and it was all this false bad stuff. People going out of their way on social media to do this or do that, and it really did bother me to the point when I've had to send out a cease and desist to somebody just last week because a customer came forward and she gave me pictures of what they were doing, and I'm just like, okay, that's a little ridiculous. And sometimes like some of the hate, it was starting to get to me psychologically, especially when Wicked died. That was awful for me. Even though I have my wife and stuff, he got me through pretty much everything. And at that point, that's when the noise was the absolute worst. Was getting so, worked up and upset about it that, my wife had to like really reassure me that it's okay. You're not doing anything wrong. This is just what happens. And people are going to do this because they're jealous or because they just, that's just how people are, I guess is what she
So
said.
it was
So
just people in the industry sort of bashing the products and
a
whatnot.
little bit,
Yeah.
not really bashing the products, just bashing me, just being like, this guy's a bleep, to put it lightly, this little ginger POS is such a bleep and idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I've had people come to my business and try to copy my stuff. There was a startup, I guess, in North Texas. She came here and she bought two of everything, which I didn't catch. 6 months later, boom, there we go. I've had other people try to sneak into my manufacturing when I've had to have my manager escort them out. And then that guy went and worked for a quote unquote another company. And then boom, I see, their version of my Sahara on their table. And then they ended up stopping doing that in a month because guess what? Methane. So I've had a lot of people try and put me, like, not necessarily put me down, just really go out of the way to try to just try to, like, you be like, you can do all this yourself. His products are a waste of money or this and that. I'm not doing this for the money. I want to make it really clear to everybody. I'm doing this because we got to change the way that people perceive and keep these animals as pets. They have such a negative stigma and they have this stupid hue over them, marking them as disposable pets. And it is wrong. It is wrong. And we as a community need to step up, work together, and do what's best for the animals to start instead of trying to get at each other's throats. And that's what upset me the most is I don't even know who these people were. I never did business with, I don't know anything. And then boom, there it was. But it's been a lot better, and I've found ways to be able to deal with it and to be able to not have it affect me here. And my staff really helps me a lot with dealing with that, with helping me reinforce me and that I can believe in myself. Because heck, even me going for this small business loan that I just got approved for, man, that it was terrifying to me because if I fail, it's, if you fail, you're not going to pay back $600,000. They're gonna take everything that you have that they legally can take, and but at the same time, dude, that drives me. And I said the same thing to my mom after everything went down with my brother and when all the noise was going on. I was like, Mom, I let this fuel me. I was like, my entire life, I've always been the underdog, is what she would say. Like, I'd always be picked last for basketball, or I'd always be, be that guy that was always in the corner reading a book. I was never out doing stuff with people. I was always the loner, and I've always kind of been that way. So sometimes I guess that's just the reasoning. I don't know.
Well, look, I'm a swim coach. Like, part of my job, like my actual job, is I coach swimming, and I was an athlete for 20 years almost. And so part of the reason I love sports so much is because it exposes like the heart in people, and this, like, you almost see somebody's soul in sport in ways that you don't normally see anywhere else. But entrepreneurship obviously is another area, another arena where you see that. And I think you clearly have this like deep burning, it's the only way to describe it is heart. And it's hard to describe how much shit someone can put up with. Not everybody can handle that, and it's really amazing that you've been able to sort of just slog your way through that.
Slog it. That is the best adjective that I could think of to describe.
Is that a word?
To describe it, it's always one thing after another. There has never been a point in my career as an entrepreneur that I've been able to like have nothing going on, or be able to just not have a single worry. Like, when my wife and I were on our honeymoon in Belize, like, I left my phone in the hotel room pretty much the entire time, just so that way I wouldn't be, I don't want to say reachable, but so that way I could take that mental time that I need. Because, if you are going to go for it, which I tell everybody, if you want to go for it, because if you put the work in, anything is possible. But it's just one of those things, like, you just got to accept it and keep going for it. I mean, over the summer, I started doing educational talks to kids called the Reptile Experience Houston, which I actually just filed for my nonprofit for. So I'm hoping that what I can do with it is use it as an education tool, that I just pro bono go to different churches and summer camps and just educate kids about reptiles. I did four different ones this summer so far, and I brought about 6 animals. I pull them out and talk about them, between 60 and 80 kids in each one, I think it was. And, just those reactions, like when I pulled out my carpet python, those kids lost their minds, dude. They lost their minds. It was great. And just seeing that appreciation at a young age, getting kids in the right mindset that, snakes aren't evil. If you see them, you don't cut their heads off. You just appreciate them for what they are. Or, if you find a turtle, don't touch it. just stuff like that. Just that small reinforcer to give them the appreciation that these animals deserve.
And that must be like just a good rejuvenation, right? Like just sort of allow you to forget about the hate, and working with kids is the best.
Oh yeah, and I wasn't trying to touch on like the hate. It's not that bad. I just wanted to try and say like, I advocate at home mixes. If you don't want to go through me, that's cool. I encourage you to go bio in any means possible. It was just constantly like people thinking and saying that I don't encourage that or I'm against it, that you should only be spending money with me.
Yep.
No,
And
not at all. I just want people to keep them the right way.
so let's talk. I want to chat about Bioactive.
Okay.
Let's talk, because I think it is growing a lot, and in the hobby, it's becoming more and more prominent. So if we were to kind of walk through just the simple step by step process for someone, if like let's pick a simple animal like maybe a crested gecko,
Okay.
if they wanted to set up a Bioactive enclosure, let's start at the base.
Okay. So since you're dealing with a tropical or a neotropical climate, you're going to want to make sure that you have a drainage layer. So the drainage layer is going to essentially capture any of the remaining water that isn't supposed to be in the substrate out of the substrate. When I talk about the drainage layer, I like to tell people think of it as the Earth's groundwater. So there's always a groundwater underneath all your layers of soil. What do you think that is? It is a natural drainage layer. That is just how the earth is, just like you have your tributaries and lakes and rivers and stuff like that. So there are different types of drainage layers that you can use. You can use like the clay balls Lika, which you can get at Amazon, any hydroponic store. You can get my Hydro Grow. You can use the Grow Stone. Just keep in mind that Grow Stone, just like perlite, you can also use perlite, works great, is made of glass. So what they do, they end up cooking it at a really high degree, which causes it to expand, which then gives you your good drainage layer. Some people like to put a screen at the top. If you're using like my Hydro Grow because it creates a flat surface, or perlite, you don't need it. But if you're doing a surface that is bumpy and uneven, that can create different variations of your substrate depth, then you're going to want to have some type of divider over the screen layer, because the last thing you want is soil to get stuck in a crack and slowly keep absorbing water and then pushing the water back up because of the soil's absorptive properties, so to speak. The next step, which is the most important step, is your substrate. So substrate, I'm always going to recommend my Terrafauna. And I recommend a Terrafauna because unlike like your ABG and other things like that, this is designed to hold a little bit more water. Instead of ABG is designed to get wet and then water just goes right through it, like a bunch of green beans in a drainer. You run water over the green beans and it just goes. The green beans are wet, but the water just flows right on through down to the bottom. That is a great example of ABG. The fauna is going to hold a lot more moisture, but aerate top to bottom perfectly. So what that's going to do is since it holds more moisture and it's constantly putting more out, that's going to help with your humidity spikes throughout the day. So when you're dealing with neotropical lizards such as crested geckos, gargoyle geckos, some species of they're more montane, Europlatus, that like to have humidity spikes throughout the day, this allows you to do that with little to no misting. Whereas if you're using like ABG, which will still work, by the way, it'll work great, you're going to be misting it significantly more because water just passes through it and it stays wet. The most important part, if you're going to be mixing soil at home, you never want to use straight coconut coir. Never, ever, 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 ever use it straight. And if you want to use it straight, you need to change it out every 2 weeks because it gets really acidic because of the pH. It doesn't drain well. In fact, it doesn't drain at all. And it just keeps absorbing water and water and water. And frogs or crested geckos in general, you let the soil just get waterlogged like that, you're going to have nasties build up. And when you're in an enclosed environment like that, those nasties are their byproducts are significantly worse than where it was if we were outside. It's the same principle if you're walking through a swamp and you step down and that nasty smell of rotten eggs comes up. That's methane. That's all that organic matter getting stuck down there and being broken down by your funguses and bacteria in the sun and whatever detrivores are in the water or elsewhere. So,
So
as far
what
as
is the fauna made out of? Like, what's the ingredients in that? It's a mixture of things.
yeah, so it does have a lot of different ingredients. So this is what I will say: the fauna has six parts to it right now. And there's about 10% of a coconut product in there, but everything else is either meant for absorptive or draining or clumping purposes. But I really designed it to ensure that, how do I say this? To ensure to make it as easy for the user as possible. If you wanted to try like an at-home mix, you can do like 40% peat, uh, with like orchid bark, charcoal, and then maybe if you can find it, some sand. That should work, but you just got to really watch your water levels and making sure that it's adequately mixed and that your everything is distributed right. Because again, if it holds too much water, it's going to fail. If it just drains water too effectively, you're going to be misting the tank all the time to try to keep the humidity where it needs to be for that animal. That makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, and that's what I always find. Like with mine, I always have lots of water in the drainage layer. Like especially with my day gecko, who I miss like two, 3 times a day. There's
Yep.
always water in there. Is that something that I should have a drain for, or like what? Or is that
You
okay?
can. So as long as the water never goes past the drainage layer, you'll be okay. But you obviously want to make sure because if your soil isn't aerating top to bottom, what do you think is happening as your water tries to evaporate?
Yeah, it just starts to
It
rot.
it'll stagnate,
Yeah.
and then that's stagnating particles. So that's why it's so important that it aerates. But as long as your soil's aerating, you shouldn't have anything to worry about. And if it does get a little high, you can just siphon it out with a small tube, or before you set the tank up, you can install like a bulkhead at the front of the tank, and then just like put a spigot type of thing with a at the end of it and drain it that way. That's how I used to do for dark frogs.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
So after the soil or after the substrate, I guess you probably have like leaf litter or
Yes, yes. So there's a lot of different biodegradable options that you want. So your base biodegradables, your leaf litter, your sphagnum moss, those are great. There are other things that you can use: cork bark pieces, palm bark, palm leaves, uh, 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 the paperback bark. And what you can do is break them all into really tiny pieces and mix it up to the soil. What's going to happen is that's really going to create microbial hotspots for my bioshot to put the different or matter eating microbes in there to spread out faster, as well as create a bacteria and fungus hotspot that will essentially just keep putting essential good stuff into the soil until it slowly is eaten and completely gone. And it also can become a hotspot if you choose to use microfauna, which I highly recommend. So that has a lot of different uses for it. There is never too many soil additives that you can put in there to help maintain the life of your soil. But what I like to tell people is the biodegradables and everything I talked about, think of it as the gas that drives the car, with the substrate being the car. Because if you don't have the biodegradables, if you put the bioshot in there, if you put the bugs in there, it's don't put either of those in there. You put them in there without the biodegradables, it's not going to be as effective because there's no fuel for them to consistently revitalize the system. That makes sense.
yeah, it makes perfect sense. And actually, like those are just 3 steps. It's fairly simple. Like if someone
Yeah.
wanted to get into it, it's not very, very difficult to sort of figure out for the first time.
Yep. Yep. It's not. And most people get a little intimidated by it's the plants.
Hmm.
People see the live plants and they're like, I can't keep plants alive in my house. How the hell am I going to keep them alive in this tank? But it all comes down to anybody. I'm telling you, anybody. If my dad can do it, and he has, anybody can do it. I watched that man kill a pothos plant.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
For anyone that doesn't have pothos, they are literally impossible to kill.
Yep, that's what I said. But it's okay. Um, but that's why I was so happy with the BioShop, because that puts in organic fertilizer in a 4:4:4 NPK ratio, so it gives the plants the nutrition they need. That's where people have trouble, because they put the plants in the soil, but there's nothing in there again. There's no nutrients. You put in your springtails. Yeah, you put in your isopods, but they're not going to be shelling out nutrition and nitrogen and other things for your plants until they're established. And that's going to take a while. So a lot of people ask me, Josh, can I put the animals in right away? Should I let it establish? To me, you can go either way, dude. But see, I'm impatient.
It's not like a fish tank.
Yeah. When I build something, man, I just want to see my critters in there. Yeah, I want to get them in there as long as it's not like siliconed or anything like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about, obviously you have a misting system set up, and do you use misters and foggers, or mostly misters and sometimes foggers?
So my entire operation when it comes to the care of the animals is automated from the Mist King system to the lights, to pretty much everything. The only thing that we really have to do is feed and make sure they have clean water, and clean the front of the glass because the frogs always leave the residues. We do use some foggers with a couple of my terrariums, the ZooMed foggers. They're really nice. And I also use some of the Exoterra fountains or waterfalls. Just keep in mind that if you choose to use a compact enclosed moving water source, you need to pull it and clean it at least once every 3 days because it's dark. Guess what grows in a dark, wet space? Bacteria and fungus. What gets stuck in the crevices of the water? Crickets, isopods, roaches. So if you choose to use the in-tank things to help stimulate drinking and other things like that, I always tell people to disinfect them at least once a week. But the foggers I have found to be extremely helpful with neonatal animals, because sometimes, at least I've had young chameleons hate Mist Kings. Like they would get so pissed off that they would all huddle in the corner away from it, even though it wasn't misting anywhere near them. And then by the time that they would be so unangry to go and actually drink the droplets, it would almost be gone. So I found the fogger to be not as intrusive to them, depending on the size of the cage, while still giving them some of the moisture content that they need.
Yeah, I mean, foggers sometimes have a bad rap, but really it's ventilation. Like as long as you have adequate ventilation, like you can't just like fog it so it's just like in the mist and they'll never be able to breathe. Like as long as there's good vents, foggers are actually okay.
You're right. Ventilation and drainage are keys. So so for a dart frog, do not use a fogger. Absolutely not, because they need a solid glass cage. But if you have like an 18 by 1824 Exoterra with a crested gecko in it with a drainage layer, and you want to use a ZooMed fogger to go off 20 seconds 3 times a day, it'll be okay. Yeah. Because there's enough airflow at the top and the front to allow those humidity spikes to recede.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about water spots? Like what kind of water do you run through the Mist King? Because I find like water you get spots all over the glass. Is that something you just put up with, or?
So I actually have a business account with Sparklets Corp down here, which owns like AquaClear and a bunch of other stuff. So I get RODI water in these big 5-gallon buckets, and the 5-gallon containers, and I get 24 of them delivered a week because I have them all over my warehouse for my staff because it gets so freaking hot down here. So that's all I use. We don't get as many water spots, but I recommend either using like if for a Mist King system, because of how fine the mesh is, you cannot use treated tap water. It will ruin the nozzles and the pieces within a couple months. You always just want to use RODI or distilled water, but distilled water doesn't have anything in it. So if you're dealing with amphibians or something like that, you might want to consider like adding electrolytes or something like that. I can't remember all the time.
Yeah, I've heard people kind of straying away from distilled just because it's just H2O and there's no minerals or anything in it, and you can. That's
right.
Yeah, and in terms of like when we think bioactive, we often think tropical, but Arid bioactive is a thing you can do as well.
Oh, absolutely. So my bearded dragon and thousands of others now at this point is living proof. I gotta tell you, when Animal Planet flew me out to California to do that show, man, that was so humbling and crazy to see these big wig people have an appreciation for the Arid Bioactive, because they said, Josh, we've never seen anything like this before. This is amazing. And you obviously, I always recommend the BioShot with it, but there's a lot of options that you can use for an arid substrate. You can use superworms that evolve into those black beetles. You can use earwigs. You can use your desert, your drier species of isopods like powder blues, giant oranges. If you can find the springtails, they're almost always mislabeled, by the way. 99% of sellers selling tropical pink springtails and this and that, they're always columbolas or balsamians. I was when I closed Genesis and I had to sell all those springtail lines that I said, I knew I lost a fortune, because I was one of the only people to actually have the real actual springtails that were actually being sold to the correct thing. So finding springtails that work for arid mixes is challenging, but I will have them very soon, I promise. And with the springtails in the arid setups, you're always going to find them in the same portions of the cage. You're going to find them underneath the water dish at the very bottom of the substrate. The isopods, you're going to find in the woods, your cork bark, your grapevine, your ghostwood, your leaf litter, and at the bases of the plants. Your earwigs are going to be all throughout the substrate. And if you have an arid setup, highly, highly, highly recommend earwigs. You can find them almost anywhere in the United States. And while they may look scary and while they're really ugly, they're harmless. And they are probably the best soil aerators there is that I personally had experience with. They're even better than the superworms. You just obviously want to make sure you're keeping your populations in check to make sure that one isn't out competing the other.
Right. So I just have like 2 more questions for you, and then we've already gone through the whole 60 minutes. So in terms of the arid species as well as snakes bioactive, like these are animals that are producing quite a lot of waste.
Yes.
At once, rather than like a gecko or something. So is there anything specific you do to tackle that?
So if you're dealing with a large snake, you need to let the terrarium settle. So for example, my carpet python, he's a wonderful example, Smithers. He's in a 36-18 by 36, and he has 7.5 inches of firma with no drainage layer. That snake takes poops, huge poops. So initially, I had to spot clean his tank for about 3 months. And then after everything got established, I don't do anything, dude. The isopods break it down, or if the isopods aren't breaking it down, it gets covered in the white fuzz and the microbes from the BioShot, and it is literally broken down in 3 days. And all of my snake enclosures, snake skin does not last longer than 24 hours.
Really?
I'm not kidding, dude. Like I actually, the moment they shed, I make my employees pull out the shed for the reptile experience for the kids so they can sit and touch it, because if we don't pull it right away,
it's gone.
It's gone. And again, it's just giving your tank time to acclimate and making sure that, if as long as you're providing the right husbandry for your animal, and as long as your base layer is correct, it will take care of itself. I promise. Here's a fun fact. 99% of the time, springtails will just automatically show up.
Yes.
99%. 99% of the time. You might not see them, but you'll see these little tiny white things in there. Guarantee you, springtails. Or some types of soil mites are almost in everything. Just like grain mites are in our cereal. Grain mites are in the fruit fly media. They're in everything. So that's just something else to keep in mind.
Yeah. So as long as you start with the spot clean for maybe 3, 4, 5 months, eventually it'll take over, and you just kind of have to watch it.
Exactly. And so if you're using just my BioShot with no bugs, it takes a little bit. It takes about 3 months, because you have to let all those organic processes spread throughout the soil. And then as the plants grow, the root bases get stronger. The roots help aerate the soil, provide more nitrifying opportunities, which creates more byproducts. More byproducts means more organic breakdown. But if you're trying to go with, the springtails, the isopods, honestly, if you put in 2 dozen springtails, 2 dozen isopods of, your larger species and like a 20 long 40 breeder, you'll have that thing going in a month and a half. It doesn't take long, especially if you're given the isopods and the springtails the fuel, because, they breed like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So
That's very cool. So the very last question I had for you was, what about gnats? Do you deal with fungus gnats?
I dealt. There was about a year and a half ago. I got. While we were away, and my Miss King malfunctioned and put 5 gallons of water amongst all my terrariums in the weekend, which water clogged everything. I was able to salvage 60% of everything by letting it dry out without no misting or anything like that, like the snake enclosure, some other stuff, but about 2 of them got gnats from it. I pretty much had to completely dry that tank out and, recycle it back to get rid of them. Gnats can come from a few sources. So they love oversaturated soil. If you get gnats, chances are your soil has a little bit too much moisture in it. And if that's the case, cut back your misting and then they will go away. Another way that you can try to combat the gnats is you can just get a little cup of apple cider vinegar with some Dawn dish soap and have it bubble up. They're attracted to the smell. They'll fly into it, get stuck, and drown. But I've never had a consistent overall issue time and time again with gnats. But I know some people have, and it also depends on where you live as well. That's a huge factor, just like with maintaining your humidity in your terrarium. If you live in Pennsylvania, you have to miss that cage 2 times a day if you want it to be really high. Whereas if you're in Texas, dude, once every other day, because it's a tropical. Houston's tropical at this point.
Yeah. I always find like I go through waves. Like usually in the summer there'll be a few weeks where I just get like gnats, and they're just so annoying. Yep. And yep. That's when I have the most humid. And then in the winter it's like 10% humidity where I am, so I don't really have to worry about it. So that's a good point. Just letting the soil dry out a little bit, and then you can capture them too. Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a great story, and honestly, I can't wait to. I'm going to definitely try out some of your products because I'm redoing some of my day gecko enclosure. So I think Reptiles Are Us supplies BioDude.
Yes, I'm trying to get my phytosanitary certificates to ship my substrates into Canada. It's just very, 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 very hard to get.
Yeah, I bet.
So I'm working on it, Canada. I'm trying to get my soils to you. I'm working so hard. But the diets and stuff are over there. I know he has the BioShot and the diets. So
awesome.
That's
And then in terms of for everybody else, where can they? I mean, most people from listening are from the United States. So where can people find you and your products and your business?
So obviously, the BioDude.com. You can also, I have lots of different resellers in the United States, from Dallas Fort Worth Reptarium, the Scales and Tails. I can just do to some Pet Supplies Plus stores. I've been working real hard with my wholesale. So you can find me in some stores. If you're not sure, you can email us. But, mainly, my website. And if you're here in Texas, come to my store, the BioDude Houston. Open Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. You can come see my showroom, come see animals. And, of course, meet the dude and, see some and build your terrarium,
All right. That is great. Thank you very much, Josh. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
It was a pleasure, dude. Thank you so much for your time and hosting me on the show. I appreciate it.
All right. Just when you think the episode's over, it's not over. After I listened to this episode, a couple weeks later, Josh and I recorded this episode probably like 5 or 6 weeks ago at this point. And after I re-listened to it, I had another question about snake bioactivity, specifically for snakes that spend all their time or most of their time on the ground. I was wondering how you accomplish making a bioactive environment without running into high moisture issues. Obviously, bioactivity, when you have a bioactive enclosure, you're dealing with a lot of moist and damp substrate for the most part. And I was wondering how you avoid scale rot or fungal disease or respiratory infections and whatnot. So Josh was absolutely nice enough to record himself answering that question for me, and he sent it to me via email, and I will let that play now.
Okay, so when you are dealing with snakes and bioactive, I actually get this question all the time. All of us know that, snakes can be prone to scale rot, fungal infection, upper respiratory infections, a bunch of different stuff. And that was one of my biggest things of combating those things with going to keep snakes on bio. So some of the things that I always recommend for all snakes. So the number one rule of thumb with snakes is that they're always going to burrow. Doesn't matter what type of snake you have. It is in their nature to burrow, regardless if you have a Burmese python or a little corn snake. So it's very imperative as a keeper that you are not only providing enough substrate that, that allows for the encouragement of that behavior, but you need a substrate that also is going to aerate top to bottom to prevent moist, stagnant pockets. So I don't use drainage layers at all for snakes. I will never recommend a drainage layer for a snake for multiple reasons. One, the drainage layer is always going to potentially have water at the bottom. What's going to happen with that water is it's slowly going to evaporate out of the drainage layer into the soil. But what that's going to do is that medium is always going to be wet. Even regardless if you're using a screen, what's going to happen is when your snake goes down and burrows, you're going to be exposing your snake to that constant over wetness that comes with drainage layers, which could be a potential problem. Another potential problem is the snake moving the screen, if you're using a screen, and mixing up the drainage layer with the substrate, which then you'd have an even bigger issue. I say the same things with people that have chubby frogs, Pac-Man frogs. Don't use a drainage layer. I highly recommend, using a soil that highly aerates from top to bottom. And that's why I designed my Firma. So the Terra Firma, which is one of my soils that I recommend for most snakes, it will retain all tunnels and burrows. It stays dry on the top layer and moist in the middle and bottom layers. So it's going to give your snake options to be able to get away from the humidity if they want to get away from the humidity, or B, get with the humidity, to help them shed, hydrate, respirate, all that good stuff. So to prevent scale rot and other issues such as respiratory infections and things like that, it's imperative that obviously you're following the husbandry practices that are required for the animal, but you are also making sure that your soil is not becoming oversaturated, that there are dry portions in the soil, i.e. the top layer, that will make sure that you are able to provide the proper humidity gradients into the soil. A lot of people might have, issues with that if they don't know how to create their homemade mix that aerates from top to bottom. So if you are creating your homemade mixes, which I recommend you do whatever you want to do, as long as it thoroughly aerates and thoroughly retains the tunnels and burrows, you shouldn't have anything to worry about. And that's mainly for terrestrial snakes. When you're dealing with, your snakes that are arboreal, such as your chondros, your Amazon tree boas, and other things like that, they, as far as if they burrow, I haven't had enough experience with them to know that, that they burrow, or that they will burrow at different times or often, but it's still something you need to take into consideration. So if you need to absolutely use a drainage layer with a snake, I would highly recommend my Super Grow, which is just expanded pond medium that is used to catch large particles in ponds. I cut it down to size and use that as a drainage layer with the Firma. But if you're dealing with a really high humidity snake, an eyelash viper, or, something like that, just as an example, you're going to want to make sure that if you use a drainage layer, that it's not something that the snake can ruin. It's not something that the soil that you're using with the drainage layer, you need to make sure that your animal has easy access to go into the soil and get out. Because the last thing you want is to have, not necessarily saying the snake's going to get trapped, but making it harder to get out of where it needs to be. And that's another nice thing about having a really good soil that aerates, is you can put, your temperature humidity probe in the soil. It'll tell you exactly where it's at. So that's something that you can also look at to see how well of the thermo and humidity gradients that you're providing in a closed ecosystem. So overall, making sure your husbandry is on point, making sure that your soil aerates, and making sure that, that if you're going to use a drainage layer, that it's foolproof. And again, I'd recommend my Terra Firma, to make that from happening. But again, you can use whatever homemade mix that you want that you feel is going to work with keeping, terrestrial snakes on Bioactive. With snake feces, another thing that I might have not mentioned is, the BioShot's definitely going to help with all of that. But I do highly recommend putting other types of cleaners in there, obviously, to help with aeration, structure for your burrows, as well as help with plants. I'd recommend, if you're going with a more arid species like powder blue isopods and into springtails, and if you're going with a humid species that likes a lot more humidity than normal, I'd recommend dwarf white isopods and, your springtails. You can also use things like dermestid beetles in a drier environment. If it's a really humid environment, some people may choose to use red wigglers, as they'll also create a byproduct of worm castings, which are extremely beneficial to your soil. So there's a lot of different avenues that you can do to help incorporate the bioactivity into your bioactive terrariums for different types of snakes.
Okay, now we are officially at the end of the episode. So thank you so much for listening. I'm very glad to hear that many of you guys are enjoying the content the podcast is producing. So thanks a lot for listening. Josh, thank you very much for joining me on the show. I really appreciate you telling your story. Really fascinating conversation. And thank you so much for answering that little extra question at the end and taking some time out of your day to do that. That was great. Make sure to check out the Advancing Herpetological Husbandry Conference at the end of September 28th, 29th in Rodeo, New Mexico. The notes are below. You can check out, see if you can take some time off work and go check out that conference. If you are interested in supporting Animals at Home, go to animalsathome.ca/podcast, and there's a bunch of different ways you can support the show there. I will talk to you guys next time.